Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we are going to be tackling something I think a lot of people struggle with, and that's learning a new language.
Oh, yeah. Definitely a challenge for many.
Yeah. So we're going to be focusing specifically on effective techniques for learning English. And we're going to do that by looking at a real podcast called Learning English with Podcasts.
Okay.
And it's hosted by Sharo and Anna. And, you've told us in the past that you want to learn new things quickly and effectively, but also enjoy the process.
Absolutely.
So we figured, let's take a look and see what this podcast has to offer. It's actually a pretty substantial series with 70 episodes.
Wow, 70 episodes. That's quite a lot of content to dive into.
Yeah, it is.
I'm curious what they cover in such a long series.
Yeah, so I think what really struck me about their approach was how they kind of break down this idea of natural learning.
Oh, interesting, because I feel like natural language learning is something that's often talked about, but it can be kind of vague sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Yeah.
what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
So they go beyond, the typical advice of just listen to more English. And they give some really specific, actionable steps.
Oh, I like that. I'm all about practical tips.
Me too. So give me an example. Like, what kind of things are they suggesting?
Well, for instance, they suggest something as simple as like switching your phone's language settings to English.
Oh, that's a good one. I've heard that before.
Yeah, or finding online communities where you can actually chat with native speakers. So they're really emphasizing that immersion isn't just about passively listening, it's about actively surrounding yourself with the language in ways that fit your lifestyle.
That makes sense. It's kind of like building those mini English-speaking moments into your day.
Exactly. And I was reading something recently about how even small changes like that can actually have a big impact on your brain's ability to kind of pick up new language patterns.
Interesting. So it's not just about, the amount of time you spend. It's also about, like, the consistency and, like, the way that you're exposing yourself to the language.
Right. It's
Yeah.
about creating those neural pathways and strengthening them over time.
Cool. So we've got the phone setting. We've got, online communities. What else?
Well, they also emphasize active listening.
Oh, I've heard that's really important.
Yeah, and they encourage listeners to pay attention to not just the words being said, but the way things are said, the pronunciation, the rhythm, even the intonation.
I've heard that before, but I have to admit I'm guilty of sometimes just zoning out and focusing on getting the gist.
Oh, yeah, I think we all do that from time to time.
So why is that level of detail so important?
Well, think about it. When you were a child learning your native language, you didn't just learn words in isolation, right? You learned how they were used in context, how they sounded when spoken with different emotions, how the tone of voice could completely change the meaning of a sentence.
Right, like sarcasm.
Exactly. Active listening helps you to pick up on those subtle nuances, which are essential for truly mastering a language.
Okay, that's really interesting. So it's almost like becoming a language detective, paying attention to all the clues.
I like that analogy. Yeah, it's about really immersing yourself in the soundscape of the language.
Okay, but let's be honest. Language learning can be intimidating,
Oh, absolutely.
especially for beginners. How do Sharo and Anna address that fear of making mistakes?
You know what? They're all about embracing those mistakes.
Really?
Yeah, they actually call them stepping stones instead of roadblocks. They even dedicate a whole segment to explaining why mistakes are so crucial to the learning process.
I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's not about being perfect. It's about using each error as an opportunity to learn and improve.
That's a really positive perspective. I think a lot of people get stuck in that perfectionism trap, and it ends up holding them back.
Absolutely. They can really stifle your progress.
So it sounds like Sharo and Anna are creating this safe space for learners to kind of experiment and take risks.
Exactly. It's about fostering that growth mindset where you're not afraid to put yourself out there.
Okay, so that's the overall philosophy. But what about the more practical aspects of their podcast? Like you mentioned, they have 70 episodes. What kind of structure do they follow?
So they've structured the series to gradually build your skills. Each episode focuses on a new element, whether it's grammar, vocabulary, or conversational skills, while also reinforcing what you've learned previously.
So it's not just a random collection of tips. There's an actual learning path built in.
Exactly. They've really thought about the progression of learning.
That's helpful for people who want a little more guidance. But wouldn't that get kind of overwhelming after a while? 70 episodes is a lot.
That's where their bite-sized approach comes in. They break down complex topics into these easily digestible chunks, using simple language and avoiding jargon.
Okay, so it's manageable.
Right, it is. They also prioritize practical phrases and dialogues that you could actually use in everyday
So
situations.
it's not just about memorizing a bunch of rules. It's about equipping you with the tools to actually communicate.
Exactly. Communication is key.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
Because I'm always a little wary of those language courses that focus solely on grammar and make you feel like you're back in school.
Yeah, nobody wants that. It should be engaging and relevant to your life.
Right. What about motivation? I know a lot of people struggle with staying consistent when learning a language. What's their take on that?
So they dedicate a good portion of their first episode to discussing motivation. And they acknowledge that it can be tough to stay on track, but they offer some really practical strategies.
Okay, like what?
Well, one thing they emphasize is remembering your why. Why are you learning English in the first place?
Oh, that's so important. I think a lot of people start learning a language without a clear purpose in mind.
Right, and without that driving force, it's easy to lose steam.
Yeah, but having that why as your anchor can be incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. It gives you that sense of direction and purpose.
Okay, so remember your why. What else?
They also suggest things like setting realistic goals, tracking your progress, and rewarding yourself for your achievements.
Oh, I like that. It's about making the process enjoyable and celebrating those small wins along the way.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between challenge and enjoyment.
Those are great tips. And they really tie back to that idea of making language learning a natural part of your life rather than a chore.
Right. It's about integrating it into your daily routine in a way that feels sustainable.
I'm already starting to see how their approach is different from what I'm used to.
Me too. They've really thought about the learner's experience and how to make it not only effective, but engaging and enjoyable.
I think it's a good place to pause and see what's resonating with you so far.
Yeah, what's standing out to you as particularly interesting or helpful?
We'll be back soon to dive deeper into the practical strategies Shoro and Anna offer.
Welcome back. I'm really curious to hear what's caught your attention so far in our exploration of Shuro and Anna's language learning approach.
Yeah, me too. I'm sure our listeners have a lot of thoughts.
Definitely. Are you ready to kind of dig into more specifics?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So one thing that really stood out to me was their emphasis on creating this English environment, even if you're not living in an English-speaking country.
Right, because not everyone has the opportunity to just pick up and move abroad.
Exactly. So it sounds great in theory, but I'm wondering how practical that is for someone with a busy schedule.
Yeah, that's a valid question. I mean, life gets in the way sometimes.
It definitely does. But Shiro and Anna actually addressed that directly in one of their episodes. They acknowledged that not everyone has the luxury of, traveling abroad or constantly interacting with native speakers.
Right.
But they argue that even small, consistent efforts to expose yourself to the language can make a significant difference.
So what kind of things did they suggest?
Well, they recommend incorporating English into your daily routine in ways that feel natural and enjoyable.
Okay, I like that. So not like forcing yourself to do something you hate.
Exactly. It should be something you enjoy. So, for example, they suggest switching your music playlist to English songs.
Oh, that's a good one. I actually do that sometimes.
Yeah, or listening to podcasts in English while you commute or exercise.
Yeah, I could see how that would be easy to fit in.
Right. Or even watching movies or TV shows in English, even with subtitles at first.
I've tried watching movies in English before, but I always feel like I'm missing half the dialogue.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a common experience. But, Shiro and Anna point out that even if you don't understand every single word, you're still absorbing the sounds and rhythms of the language.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and over time, you'll find yourself picking up more and more vocabulary and grammar without even realizing it.
So it's like training your ear to tune into the nuances of English.
Exactly. It's like a subconscious process.
Okay, I could see how that would be more sustainable than trying to force yourself into like a full-on English immersion experience overnight.
Right. It's about those gradual steps.
So we've got music, podcasts, movies.
Yeah.
What about like actually speaking with people?
Oh, yeah. That's important, too. They talk about the importance of finding English-speaking communities online.
Okay, where would you even find those?
Well, there are tons of options these days. It could be through social media groups, online forums, or even language exchange platforms.
So there's like a community for everyone.
Exactly. And they emphasize that connecting with other learners and native speakers can provide valuable opportunities for practicing your conversational skills and receiving feedback.
Yeah, I've definitely found that practicing with others can really boost my confidence and help me identify areas where I need to improve.
Right. It gives you that real-world application.
Okay, so we're making progress, we're feeling good. But what about those times when you feel stuck or frustrated? Because let's be real, it's inevitable that you'll hit those plateaus in any learning journey.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone goes through that.
So how do Cheryl and Anna address that?
Well, they offer several strategies for overcoming those moments of doubt, and one thing they emphasize is the importance of celebrating small victories and focusing on progress rather than perfection.
Oh, I like that. It's so easy to get caught up in the things you haven't mastered yet.
Right, and forget to acknowledge the progress you've already made.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But having those reminders can be a real motivator.
Absolutely. So they encourage listeners to keep track of their achievements, no matter how minor they may seem, to remind themselves of how far they've come.
Okay, what other techniques do they suggest?
Well, they also encourage learners to embrace a more playful approach to language learning.
Okay, how do you mean?
Well, instead of seeing it as a chore, they suggest finding ways to make it fun.
I like that idea. Learning should be fun.
Exactly. So, for example, they recommend playing language learning games, singing English songs, or even talking to yourself in English.
Wait, talking to yourself in English. That sounds a bit unconventional.
It may seem strange, but they argue that it's a great way to practice your pronunciation and fluency without feeling self-conscious.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful.
And they also suggest incorporating things you already enjoy into your learning routine. So if you love reading, try picking up an English novel or magazine. If you're a movie buff, make it a habit to watch English films with subtitles.
So it's about finding those points of intersection between your interests and your language learning goals.
Exactly. It's about making it personal.
Okay, so we've talked about immersion motivation fun. What about the more technical aspects of language learning, like grammar and vocabulary? Do Cheryl and Anna delve into those areas?
They definitely do. They dedicate several episodes to explaining key grammar concepts in a clear and concise way.
Okay, because I've always found grammar to be one of the most intimidating parts of language learning.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. But they avoid using complicated jargon and instead focus on providing practical examples and exercises to help learners understand how grammar works in real-life conversations.
So they're not trying to scare people away with a bunch of technical terms.
Not at all. It's about making it accessible.
What about vocabulary?
So they emphasize the importance of building your vocabulary strategically.
Okay, so not just memorizing random words.
Right. They suggest focusing on learning words and phrases that are relevant to your interests and goals.
That makes so much more sense. It's about tailoring your vocabulary acquisition to your specific needs.
Exactly, and making sure you're learning words that you'll actually use.
I'm really starting to appreciate the thoughtfulness and practicality of their approach.
Me too. They've clearly put a lot of effort into creating a comprehensive and accessible learning experience.
It really shows. Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I'd love to hear from you, our listener. What are your thoughts on the strategies we've discussed so far? What resonates with you the most? What are you feeling inspired to try?
We'll be back soon to wrap up this deep dive with some final reflections and a challenge to help you apply these principles to your own learning journey.
We're back, and wow. Exploring Cheryl and Anna's approach to language learning has been a real eye-opener for me.
I know what you mean. I'm finding myself kind of rethinking my whole approach to learning new things in general.
Yeah, like it's not just about languages, it's about anything you want to learn.
Exactly. And one thing that really struck me was their emphasis on consistency over intensity.
Right. It's not about cramming for hours on end. It's about those small, regular efforts.
Yeah, and that actually aligns with a lot of the research on habit formation. We often overestimate what we can achieve in those short bursts.
Yeah, we think we can just like power through it.
Right. But we underestimate the power of those small, consistent actions over time.
It's like the difference between sprinting and running a marathon.
And I think a marathon is definitely more fitting for language learning.
For sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of marathons, they also talked about the importance of staying motivated, especially when you hit those inevitable bumps in the road.
Right. Because those bumps are going to come up.
They always do.
Yeah.
So what do they suggest?
Well, they offered some really concrete advice on that front. One strategy they suggest is to regularly revisit your why.
Your why.
Yeah, why are you learning English? What are the goals you're hoping to achieve?
Right, because if you don't know why you're doing it, what's the point?
Exactly. And reminding yourself of those goals, whether it's traveling the world, advancing your career, or simply connecting with more people, can be a powerful motivator.
It's like having that North Star guiding you through the challenges.
Exactly. It gives you that sense of direction.
Okay, so remember your why. What else did they say?
Well, they also encourage learners to track their progress even in small ways.
Okay, so how would you even do that?
It could be as simple as noting down how many new words you've learned that week, or how much easier it is to understand a podcast episode now compared to a few months ago.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah, because it's easy to get discouraged if you're only focusing on the end goal, but recognizing those small wins along the way can make a huge difference.
It's like shifting your perspective from "I'm not there yet" to "look how far I've come."
Exactly. It's about celebrating those little victories.
And they also emphasize the importance of celebrating those achievements, no matter how small, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's like giving yourself permission to acknowledge your efforts and enjoy the journey.
Because learning should be enjoyable.
It definitely should. And, they also don't shy away from addressing the fear of making mistakes, which can be a major obstacle for a lot of learners.
Oh yeah, for sure. That fear can be paralyzing.
It can. And it can prevent people from even starting.
But they seem to really reframe that whole concept of mistakes.
They do. It's not about avoiding them at all costs.
Right.
It's about seeing them as valuable learning opportunities.
So instead of beating yourself up over every mistake,
You view it as feedback, as a signpost pointing you in the right direction.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so instead of getting hung up on perfection, it's about embracing that process of trial and error.
Yeah, and seeing each mistake as a step closer to fluency.
Exactly. And ultimately, I think that's what makes Sharo and Anna's approach so effective. They've created a framework that not only equips you with the tools and techniques you need.
But also fosters a positive and supportive learning environment.
Yeah, it's like they've thought of everything.
They really have. And it's been inspiring to explore their insights and see how much thought they've put into making language learning a truly enriching experience.
It makes you want to go out and learn something new.
It definitely does.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we'd love to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
Shura and Anna's approach to language learning is all about embracing those natural processes, celebrating progress, and finding joy in the journey.
Those are great principles.
So how can you apply those same principles to other areas of your life?
Ooh, I like that.
Think about a skill you'd like to develop, or knowledge you'd like to acquire, or even a habit you want to form.
Right, because those same principles can apply.
Exactly. Could you approach those things with that same sense of playfulness and curiosity and dedication?
That's something for our listeners to ponder.
It is. That's something to think about as you embark on your own learning adventures. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, keep those sparks of curiosity burning bright.